I never expected my grandfather's death to change my life forever. He passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 92, a man known in our family as a reserved soul with a distant look in his eyes, as if he had lived through things the rest of us couldn't even begin to imagine. When he died, I inherited his house, a creaking two-story Victorian relic on the edge of Maine's coastal woods. I'd visited it a few times as a child, but I had no real memories of it. The place had always felt like a museum frozen in time, with antique furniture, clocks that ticked too loud, and a smell of cedar and dust that clung to your clothes. After the funeral, I drove up there with a bag of clothes and the vague intention of cleaning the place out, maybe flipping it if the market allowed. I never planned to stay, but things changed the moment I stepped into the attic. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I swept the floors, opened the windows, sorted through old boxes full of family photos, letters from a different century, yellowed with age. My grandfather had been meticulous. Everything was labeled, dated, filed, but on the third day, I noticed something strange while organizing the top floor. The attic was spacious but dim, lit only by a circular window that let in pale sunlight filtered through grime. In the far corner, hidden behind a stack of broken chairs and covered in a heavy, moth-eaten sheet, I saw something that hadn't been on the blueprints. A large wooden trunk. At first, I thought it was just more storage. Another forgotten relic. But as I pulled the cloth away, I realized this trunk was different. It was sealed shut. Thick iron clasps held it closed, and the lock was old but intact. Someone had deliberately kept this shut, and judging by the layers of dust and spiderwebs, it hadn't been touched in decades. My curiosity got the better of me. I searched the house for a key but found nothing. I considered leaving it alone, but that's not how my mind works. I don't leave mysteries buried. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what could be inside, a family secret, something valuable. Or maybe nothing at all, just an old box left behind by someone long gone. By morning, my obsession had grown. I drove into town, bought a set of antique lockpicking tools, more for the aesthetic than practicality, and returned with the kind of nervous excitement that made me feel like a teenager breaking into a haunted house. It took me nearly an hour to pick the lock. When it finally gave way, a sharp metallic click echoed through the attic like a gunshot. I hesitated, hand trembling, and then slowly lifted the lid. Inside, I expected old clothes, maybe books or trinkets. What I found was wrong. The trunk was lined with deep red velvet, and lying in the center was a single item, a leather-bound journal wrapped tightly in a piece of black cloth. The moment I touched it, the air around me seemed to shift, colder, heavier. I pulled the journal out, and that's when I saw it. Scratched into the wood beneath the velvet lining, as if by fingernails, was a phrase that stopped my breath. "It doesn't stay inside." My body froze. I stood there, holding the journal, staring at those words, heart pounding against my ribs. And then I heard it, a soft thump somewhere behind me. I turned. No one was there. The attic was still, silent, but something had changed. Something had woken up. I didn't know it yet, but opening that trunk didn't just uncover an old secret. It invited something back into this world, and I had just become part of its story. I didn't sleep that night. I left the trunk open, the journal resting on my grandfather's old desk downstairs, and sat in the living room with every lamp in the house turned on. The words carved into the bottom of that trunk looped in my mind like a curse. It doesn't stay inside. What didn't stay? And why was it locked away in the first place? Around 3 a.m., the house creaked louder than usual. Not the casual moans of wood contracting in the cold, but deliberate, sharp snaps, like footsteps just above me. I knew no one was there, Still, I climbed the stairs and opened the attic door, heart thudding so violently I could hear it in my ears. Nothing. The trunk was still open, the attic still dark. I left the light on this time and closed the door gently behind me. The journal stayed on the desk, untouched until morning. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to open it. The leather was stiff, cracked in places, and the first page was blank, almost too clean. No name, no date, but when I turned to the second page, the writing began. Jagged, frantic handwriting, scrawled in black ink, filled every line. It was my grandfather's handwriting, at least I thought it was. I had seen his notes in old letters before, but this felt different, unstable, like he'd written it during some kind of delirium. The entries were dated from 1952 to 1956. They told the story of something he had found, or rather, something that had found him. The first entry was simple. It followed me home. That's all. The next few entries described how he'd come across a stone well deep in the forest behind the house. He said he heard whispers coming from inside it, calling his name. He believed it was just wind and loneliness. But then he began to see a figure at the edge of the woods every night. A woman in black, standing still, never moving. The following entries grew darker. My grandfather wrote about waking up with deep scratches on his arms, about voices whispering in his ears in languages he couldn't understand. One entry chilled me to the bone. She asked to be let in tonight. I told her no. She stood by my bed until sunrise. Another read. It isn't her anymore. She has no face now. I kept reading, unable to stop, even as the air around me seemed to get colder, as if the journal itself was affecting the temperature of the room. Every few pages there were drawings, crude sketches in pencil of a figure with long black hair, featureless face, and arms too long to be human. One picture showed her standing beside the trunk, hand resting on the lid, as if she were begging to be let out. Then there was a sudden break in the journal. No more dates, just a page that read in capital letters, "Do not open it. She doesn't forget." Beneath those words was a red fingerprint pressed into the page. Not ink. It looked fresh. But that was impossible. My grandfather had been dead for over 6 months. I dropped the journal and stepped back from the desk, bile rising in my throat. I had the overwhelming urge to burn it, to throw it back in the trunk and nail it shut again, but I didn't. Instead, I went back to the attic. I don't know. Why? Maybe to see if the trunk had changed, maybe to convince myself none of this was real. When I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed the attic door was slightly open. I was sure I'd closed it, positive. I pushed it wider and froze. The trunk was closed, the iron clasps were fastened again, and this time, the lock was back in place, except I didn't put it there. I hadn't touched it since I opened it. The tools I used to pick the lock were gone, and something new had been placed on top of the trunk, a black ribbon coiled neatly as if in offering. That's when I heard it again, the thump. This time it wasn't behind me, it was directly above me in the ceiling, where there should have been nothing but roof tiles and cold night air. Then came the whisper, a single word, spoken with a voice like wind scraping over broken glass. "Why?" I ran. I slammed the attic door shut and dragged a bookshelf in front of it like a fool in a horror movie. I didn't want to believe it, but something had changed in that house. I had triggered something or someone, and whatever it was, it hadn't finished with me yet. And maybe it never would. I didn't leave the house, not yet. Maybe I should have, but fear has a strange way of rooting you in place, making you irrationally hopeful that the storm will pass if you just keep still. I spent the next day in silence, barely eating, barely breathing, walking from room to room like a prisoner in my own home. I kept checking the attic door to make sure it hadn't moved, and every time I passed by, I could feel something waiting on the other side. Not movement, not sound, just presence. the kind that makes your skin prickle and your stomach clench without knowing why. Around sunset, I noticed something new. A photo frame in the hallway had changed. I know that sounds crazy, but it had always held an old black and white picture of my grandfather in his Navy uniform. Now, the same photo was there, but he wasn't alone. A tall figure stood in the background near the trees, blurred, but unmistakably there. A woman. I took the frame down and inspected it. It was printed directly on the paper. Not a double exposure, not some smudge. She had always been in the photo, and yet I knew for a fact she hadn't been. I checked the others, family portraits, old celebrations, and she was in those too, always in the background. Sometimes in the mirror, sometimes near a window, once behind my grandfather, her hand barely touching his shoulder. I dropped the photos and backed away, knocking over a side table. The crash didn't even startle me anymore. I was numb. But what happened next shattered that numbness. The doorbell rang. It was almost dark. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. No one knew I was there. I stood frozen in the foyer, watching the silhouette through the frosted glass. It was a woman, tall, still. She didn't knock. She just waited. I didn't open it, of course, but I didn't move either. I stood there for what felt like forever, until she slowly turned and walked away, her figure melting into the fog that had started rolling in from the woods. I bolted the door, drew every curtain, and locked myself in the bedroom, clutching the journal like it could protect me. I didn't sleep, not even a little. Around 2 a.m., the lights flickered, then went out completely. I lit a candle and sat on the floor. That's when the noises started. Not footsteps this time, but breathing. Shallow, wet, close. It seemed to come from inside the walls. No matter where I moved, it followed, like someone exhaling just behind the plaster. I clutched the journal tighter and opened to a random page, desperate for answers. One entry stood out, underlined in heavy ink. If you hear her breathing, she's already in. I dropped the book. My candle flickered violently. The window behind me rattled like something wanted in. I turned and saw a hand, pale, thin, with fingers too long, slowly dragging down the glass. I screamed, not from fear, but from sheer overload. I backed into the hallway and stumbled down the stairs. The entire house was darker than it should have been, like the shadows had thickened, become more solid. I ran to the attic door, not to go inside, but to confront it, to scream at it, demand it stop, do something. But the door was wide open. The bookshelf I had dragged in front of it was tipped over, books scattered like a storm had passed through. The attic light was on, swaying gently from its chain, casting long, erratic shadows. I wanted to run, to flee the house and never look back, but I stepped forward. I needed to see if the trunk was still there, if it was closed, if it was empty. I climbed the stairs, every step a test of will. The moment my foot touched the attic floor, the temperature dropped, not just cold and arctic. I could see my breath. And there in the center of the room was the trunk, still locked, still sealed. But the journal was gone. I spun around, scanning the room, and that's when I saw her. Standing in the far corner, almost blended with the shadows, face pale and smooth like porcelain, except where it should have had eyes and a mouth. Instead, there were just sunken indentations, like something had carved out her features. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me, or sensing me, and then, slowly, tilted her head to the side. I backed down the stairs, not blinking, heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. She didn't follow, not then, but I knew she could. I knew that attic wasn't holding her anymore. I slammed the door shut and nailed it closed, literally. I ran to the shed, found a hammer and long rusted nails, and sealed the damn thing shut, like it was Pandora's box. But even as I hammered the last nail, I knew it wasn't enough, because she wasn't trapped anymore. She was in the house. And it was only a matter of time before she made it clear what she wanted. I thought I had done everything I could to keep her out. I thought the nails, the sealed door, the candles, the prayers whispered in desperation would form a barrier, like some fragile human logic could hold back whatever force had been resting in that attic for decades. But the truth is, you can't unsee something once it's inside your reality. And she was no longer confined to the attic. Over the next 2 days, the house began to shift. I mean that literally. Doors I had locked would creak open in the middle of the night. Furniture would be moved a few inches at a time, not enough to catch it at first, but just enough to make you question your memory, your sanity. Once, I came downstairs and found every cabinet in the kitchen open, every drawer pulled out. The fridge door was ajar, the lights off. I checked every lock in the house again, then left a strip of masking tape across each doorframe, just to confirm I wasn't imagining things. That night, I heard humming. Not singing, not music, just a low, continuous hum coming from somewhere. In the walls. It vibrated through the floors, the windows, into my bones. I recorded it on my phone, thinking maybe I could prove it to someone, show them I wasn't losing my mind. But when I played it back, there was nothing. Just silence. The journal didn't return. It hadn't reappeared since the night I saw her. But pages began showing up around the house. Torn from the spine, tucked under my pillow, slipped beneath the bathroom door. Each one contained frantic writing like my grandfather's, but more chaotic now. And always the same warning written somewhere on the page, "She wants your name." At first, I didn't understand what that meant. Then I remembered something from the journal I had skimmed, an old belief my grandfather had written about, some kind of folklore. If you give her your name, she becomes part of your story. And once that happens, you no longer control the ending. I stopped speaking aloud in the house after that. No phone calls, no thoughts whispered under breath, just silence. I even wrote notes to myself instead of talking, until the morning I found one of my own notes, rewritten in different handwriting. What I had written was, "Leave now." What I found later was, "Too late." That broke something in me. I packed a bag and left, drove until I couldn't see trees anymore, found a motel near the coast and paid for a week in cash. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't post about it. I didn't even bring my phone. I just ran. For the first night in a long time, I slept. Deep, dreamless sleep. But on the second night, the humming returned. In the motel, in a different state. I woke up to find condensation on the mirror spelling out the word, name. I had told no one, no one. I began to realize she wasn't bound to that house. She wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. She was a story, one that spreads when told, one that lives in the act of remembering. I was the new narrator now, the new keeper. By opening that trunk, I didn't just release her, I inherited her. I went to a library the next morning and looked up any records I could find about the house, my grandfather, or the trunk. Most of the documents were mundane. Land deeds, census reports, property transfers. But there was one article from 1957 that made my blood freeze. It was a clipping from a local paper reporting the mysterious disappearance of a family who had lived in the house before my grandfather. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just gone. One quote from the neighbor was highlighted. They were nice folks, kept to themselves, but the girl, she always talked about the woman in the attic, said she sang to her at night. There was no follow-up, no investigation, just a single forgotten story buried in the archives. Like it had been erased. I kept reading. The further I dug, the more I realized my grandfather wasn't the first. And I wouldn't be the last. She attaches herself to a witness, someone who opens the box, reads the pages, hears the humming. The more you know, the more she sees you, the closer she gets. And now that I had run, now that I had spread her beyond the walls of that house, I had made things worse. I returned to the motel and found my door wide open. No sign of forced entry, nothing stolen, but the lights were off. And on the bed, neatly folded, was the same black ribbon I had found on the trunk, this time wrapped around a photo of me, taken from behind, in my car, that day. She was in the reflection of the side mirror, closer than she should have been, watching, waiting, and now, following. I didn't go back to the house. I knew better now. But I also knew I couldn't escape her by running. She wasn't haunting a place. She was haunting a person. Me. And if what the journal hinted at was true, she wasn't just some spirit from the past. She was older, much older, something ancient, buried in folklore, whispering between generations until someone, like me, gave her a voice again. That night in the motel, I locked the door, shoved furniture against it, taped blackout curtains over every window and left every light on. I sat in the center of the room, photo in hand, ribbon on the floor like a trap I didn't know how to disarm. I didn't dare speak. I barely even breathed. Around 3:11 a.m., I remember the exact time. Every bulb in the room burst at once. A rain of glass fell over me like a sudden storm. Then came the knock. One knock, gentle, patient, from the closet. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body simply refused to obey. Then the closet creaked open so slowly that I could hear the wood stretching, protesting, until the door was fully ajar. Nothing came out, just darkness, and then humming. Louder this time, closer, inside the room. I don't remember passing out, but when I opened my eyes, it was daylight and everything was back in place. The lights worked, the door was closed, the ribbon was gone. But my phone, which I hadn't even brought with me, was sitting on the nightstand, screen cracked, stuck on a single image, a close-up of my own face, asleep. I packed and left within minutes. No destination, just motion. I drove until I hit a dead zone with no signal and found an abandoned rest stop in the woods. There I opened my laptop and for the first time, I began writing this. I needed someone to know, someone to read it, because if I disappear, and I probably will, this needs to live on. This can't be buried again. My grandfather tried. He locked her away, sealed her voice in pages and wood and cloth, but I broke that silence. I invited her back, and now you've heard her too. You might think you're safe, that by simply reading this nothing will happen. But if you've made it this far, if her image has already formed in your mind, the humming may already have started. That's how it begins, subtle, soft, like your own thoughts echoing in a different tone, and then it grows. She learns your patterns, your fears, your name. I learned something else in my research, a name, possibly the origin of the entity. It was scribbled in the margins of a 19th century folklore journal from Eastern Europe, describing a woman who appeared in forests and cellars, mirrors and wells, wherever people were alone with regret. They called her Valiska, the one who listens from the dark, a collector of stories, of broken people. Some believed she was once human, twisted by grief so profound it unraveled her spirit. Others believed she was never human at all. Just something that waits generation after generation for someone foolish enough to give her voice again. That's what the trunk was, a vessel of memory, not just storage. And the journal wasn't a warning. It was a doorway. Each word read gave her more shape. Every phrase remembered fed her form. Now I can't stop hearing her, even in daylight. She whispers things no one else could know, my childhood nightmares, my deepest guilt. She speaks in my mother's voice sometimes in mine, and sometimes in yours. If you've ever dreamt of someone standing at the edge of your bed but couldn't move, if you've ever heard a knock and no one was there, if a reflection once blinked when you didn't, she was already near. And if you've read this far, she knows about you now. I wish I could give you a way out. A solution, a ritual, a prayer, but I haven't found one. I've only found more questions, more signs, and more silence where voices used to be. I'm tired, so tired. I'm going to try one last thing. I'm going back to the house, to the trunk. Maybe if I return what I took, maybe if I burn the pages or seal them again, maybe that will silence her. Or maybe it'll just pass her on to the next poor soul who finds the ashes and wonders what burned. But I have to try, and if I don't make it, if this report ends here, don't look for me. Don't go to the house. Don't open anything that was sealed. And above all, don't speak her name aloud, not even once, because she's always listening, and she's always hungry for the next chapter. I didn't tell anyone I was returning. I just drove, through winding roads soaked in fog, past dying trees that seemed to lean closer with every mile, until the old Victorian house came into view like a wound reopened. The shutters trembled. In the wind, the porch sagged deeper than I remembered, and yet it stood there waiting, as if it had known I would come back. As if she had known. I parked the car across the road, engine running for a few moments longer than necessary, hoping some last ounce of reason would stop me. But reason had died the moment I opened that trunk. I stepped out, bag in hand, heavy with salt, iron nails, a hammer, and the only candle I could find that smelled like the church I once believed in. As I approached the door, I noticed something new, or rather, something gone. The nails I'd driven into the attic door were gone, not pulled out, gone. No marks, no wood splinters, just a clean frame, perfectly untouched. I didn't have to go up to know it was open again. I could feel it, like a breath brushing the back of my neck. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first. Something sour, like mold and wet ashes. The air was heavy. Not just in temperature, but in weight, like it clung to my lungs. The house was darker than it should have been. Even with the curtains open, the sunlight bent strangely, as if the shadows swallowed it. Every step I took echoed deeper than it should have, and the walls felt tighter, not physically, but spiritually, like the house had shifted in my absence to accommodate something else. Something that had moved freely since I left. I didn't go upstairs right away. I went to the living room where the fireplace was cold and untouched. But on the mantel, I found something that hadn't been there before. An old photo of my grandfather. Only now he was alone. No shadowy figure in the background, no mysterious blur. Just him, smiling. But his eyes were hollowed out with black ink. As I stared at it, I heard movement above me, slow. Deliberate, like someone dragging their hand across the wall while walking. I gripped the hammer tighter and climbed the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight like the house disapproved of my return. The attic door stood ajar. The light inside was dim, flickering. I stepped in, the trunk was open, empty, and on the floor sat the journal, returned but altered. Its pages were soaked, bloated, warped, as if it had been drowned and dried, repeatedly, but one page was torn free and laid carefully beside it. It read, "She is in the walls now, the house is her body." I turned in slow horror, and that's when I noticed the veins. Not literal veins, but cracks running along the ceiling and floor, pulsating faintly like something beneath the house was breathing. The shadows shifted not randomly, but with intent, flowing toward the center of the attic, where the trunk had been, as if pulled by a silent gravity. I took the salt from my bag and poured a circle around me, hands trembling. I struck the match, lit the candle, and placed it at my feet. The flame danced violently, but didn't go out. I opened the journal and read aloud the last full entry. If she becomes story, then the story must end. If she becomes name, then the name must be forgotten. If she becomes place, then the place must burn. I looked around the attic at the rotting beams, the collapsed insulation, the air so thick it felt like oil. Could I burn it? Could fire stop her? Or would that only spread her further through the smoke, the ash, the fear? That's when I heard her again, not humming this time, speaking in my voice. Whispering things only I had ever said. apologies I never made, lies I told myself. She was peeling through my memories like pages. And then she laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just softly, knowing, confident. I ran. I didn't grab the journal. I didn't grab the bag. I broke the salt circle and bolted, leaping down the stairs 2 at a time. But as I reached the front door, it slammed shut, hard. I pulled and yanked, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, the floorboards began creaking. Not like footsteps now, but like bones stretching, flexing, waking. The house was alive. The laughter echoed again, and this time it wasn't just hers. It was layered. Dozens of voices, hundreds, all overlapping, crying, screaming, whispering, telling the same story over and over. My story, my voice. I turned and ran to the back of the house, found a window, shattered it with the hammer, and climbed through. Ripping my shirt and hand open on the glass, I didn't look back. I got in the car and drove until the house disappeared behind the trees, and I didn't stop until I reached a gas station an hour away, bleeding, shaking, gasping for breath. The attendant asked if I was okay. I wanted to tell him no, that I had made a mistake, that something was following me, but I didn't. I just said, "Don't go near 212 Westcott Hollow Road." He blinked, then frowned, and then said, "That place? Didn't that house burn down in the 60s? The words hit me like a punch to the chest. That place? Didn't that house burn down in the 60s? I stared at the gas station attendant, trying to process what he'd just said. He wasn't joking. There was no smirk, no sarcasm in his voice. Just confusion, like he was recalling a bit of local lore. "There was a fire," he continued, scratching the back of his neck. "Killed a family. Place was condemned. Torn down years ago. Nothing there now but woods." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I had just been in that house. I had stood in the attic. I had seen the trunk, touched the journal. I had bled on its floor. I got back in the car without another word and drove to the nearest library. I pulled up local archives, newspaper scans, land records. And there it was, a story dated March 3rd, 1964. Fire consumes old Westcott house. Family presumed dead. A small black and white photo showed the charred remains of the very same house I'd been living in. But something didn't make sense. The name of the owner wasn't my grandfather. It was a man named Elias Granger, a name I'd never heard in my family tree. And the photo, when I zoomed in on the front porch, I saw something impossible, the same black ribbon I'd found on the trunk, tied around a scorched post. I left the library shaking, my mind unraveling. Had I imagined it all? Hallucinated the house? The trunk? Or was the house not real in the way we understand real? Could it be that the place itself had ceased to exist physically? But something deeper still remained. I booked a motel that night, not to sleep, but to think. I laid out everything I knew, my grandfather's death, the journal, the trunk, the humming, the visions, the photo of me that someone else had taken. And then I found something I hadn't noticed before. Tucked in my jacket pocket, damp with blood from my earlier escape, was a single folded page. The same aged paper from the journal. I didn't put it there. I don't know how it got there. The message was short, written in the same frantic handwriting as before. "If the house is gone, then you are what's left." That was when the dreams began again. Stronger now, more vivid. In the first one, I stood in an empty field at night, surrounded by fog so thick it muffled sound. In the distance stood the silhouette of the house, not burning, not crumbling, just standing, whole, waiting. I tried to run, but the ground beneath me turned soft, swallowing my feet, then my legs, until only my hands remained above the soil. And she stood over me, faceless, holding the black ribbon, tying it around my wrists as I sank. I woke up screaming, soaked in sweat, clawing at my own arms. No marks, but the smell of smoke lingered in the room for hours after. I stopped trying to rationalize it. Something had happened when I opened that trunk, something that unhooked my timeline from the rest of the world. I was no longer in this version of reality. Or maybe I was, but she wasn't. Maybe she moved between the cracks, between moments, between what was and what we think is. And I had given her passage. Over the next few days, I noticed strangers staring at me too long in public, not with fear, with recognition, like they knew me. A woman at a diner handed me my receipt and whispered, "She's always behind you," without ever making eye contact. A man at a gas pump dropped his lighter when he looked up and muttered, "It's in his shadow," before driving off without paying. I started seeing my reflection where there were no mirrors, in dark windows, in puddles, in TV screens that weren't turned on. But my reflection didn't move when I did. It lagged behind. Sometimes it smiled when I didn't. I even filmed it once, set up a camera while I stared into a mirror. I looked away. My reflection didn't. It kept watching the lens, and just before the recording cut off, it leaned closer and whispered a name. My name. She had it now. That's what all of this had been about. Not the house, not the trunk. Me. The moment I read that journal aloud, the moment I gave shape to her memory, she'd begun hollowing out a space for herself. And now she had my voice, my story, my face. So I stopped speaking, stopped writing anything new. I disconnected from the internet, destroyed the files. But you're hearing this because at some point I recorded this version, this telling. I thought if I could contain it, keep it digital, I could trap her there. I was wrong. Because the last time I watched this video, the one you're hearing, now it ended differently. Not with my voice, but with hers, telling the story like it had always been hers to tell, and maybe now it is. I tried to disappear. I deleted every trace of myself online, closed my bank accounts, tossed my ID into a river somewhere near the border, and started living out of a borrowed trailer behind a scrapyard. No phone, no internet, just paper, silence, and the occasional whisper of wind through rusted metal. But even then, even in isolation, she found ways in. The whispers returned, but they weren't external anymore. They came from inside my thoughts, disguised as my own voice. I'd be thinking something simple, "I need to eat today." And a second later, I'd hear that same sentence, just wrong. The cadence would be off, the accent slightly altered, like an impersonation one breath away from perfect. And then there were the notes. Handwritten messages slipped under the trailer door in the night, even though no one knew where I was. The first one said, "I'm already inside your name." I burned it. The second one said, "You are not telling this story. I am." I tried to burn that too, but it wouldn't catch fire. I soaked it in lighter fluid, struck a dozen matches. Nothing. The paper just curled at the edges, then returned to normal, like it was laughing. I started recording myself again, not to publish, but to prove to myself I still existed. But every playback was wrong. In one, I watched myself speaking with no sound at all, just my mouth moving in a language I didn't know. In another, I spoke normally, but my reflection in the trailer's mirror was gone. And once, just once, I hit play and saw her sitting in my chair, faceless, still, wearing my clothes. I slammed the laptop shut and vomited into the sink. That night, I tried to write her out of the story. I took every journal entry I remembered and rewrote them with a different ending. In one, the house had never existed. In another, my grandfather had died peacefully with nothing strange ever happening. In the last one, I never opened the trunk. I wrote for hours, tearing page after page, until my hands cramped and bled. I fell asleep at the desk, and when I woke up, all the pages were gone. In their place, stacked neatly where my hand had rested, was a single note in her script. "Thank you for the new chapters." That was when I understood. She doesn't just feed on memory or fear, she feeds on narrative. Every retelling, every version gives her new shape, new ways to enter, to infect. That's why she didn't kill my grandfather. That's why she didn't burn the house down herself. She needed someone to continue her, someone to write the next act. And I had done exactly that. I wasn't her victim, I was her author, or worse, her host. I looked in the mirror again, this time with a flashlight, expecting the worst. And what I saw, I can barely describe it. My face was there, but it wasn't mine. It was stretched subtly, as if something else had worn it too long. My eyes were dull, flat, like glass over a painting. And just behind me, almost too faint to see, was her silhouette. Not moving, not watching, mimicking. I didn't scream, I didn't flinch. I simply said, "What do you want?" And for the first time, she answered. But not with words, with thought. A phrase formed in my mind like it had always been there, carved deep and old. "Let me finish." That's when I realized something horrifying. She doesn't want me dead. She wants me silent, erased, forgotten, so she can keep the story going without contradiction. Every time I try to fight, she adapts. Every time I try to warn others, she spreads. It's not possession in the way you imagine. It's not a demon wearing your skin. It's worse. It's narrative overwrite. She doesn't invade your body. She invades your story, slowly shifting the pieces until you forget who you were and begin reciting her version of you instead. That's what happened to the man in the article. That's what happened to the girl who saw her in the attic. That's what happened to my grandfather. And now, it's happening to me. Or maybe it already has. Maybe I'm not the original anymore. Maybe the me recording this is the version she wants you to hear. And maybe the fact that you're still listening means she's already begun rewriting you. You'll think about her tonight, even if you try not to. In the shower, you'll hear humming you can't explain. In the dark corners of your room, you'll sense someone standing. In your dreams, she'll appear as someone familiar, a voice you trust, a face you forgot, a gesture that feels just a little off. And when you wake up, you might notice something small has changed. A photo, a word, a memory, and you'll wonder, was it always that way? And she'll be one step closer. There's something terrifying about realizing your memories aren't yours anymore. Not because they're gone, but because they've been rewritten, subtly, painlessly, like a careful editor revising your life while you sleep. I started noticing it a few days ago. I reached for my father's old compass, the one he gave me when I turned 12 and told me never to trust my sense of direction. Only, it wasn't where I remembered it. It wasn't mine. There was a compass, sure, but it was different. A different brand, a different scratch on the casing, initials engraved on the back I didn't recognize. AMG. I don't know anyone with those initials. Then came the photo albums. People with familiar eyes but strange names. My mother's face in a wedding picture next to a man I'd never seen. Me in a graduation gown I never wore. The past had started to rot at the edges, folding in on itself like brittle paper. At night, the dreams came stronger, but they weren't dreams anymore. I know because when I woke up, I was somewhere else, in clothes I didn't own, sleeping in beds I didn't recognize. Once I woke up in the attic, that attic, except it was pristine. Sunlight poured through clean windows. The trunk was closed, polished, sealed, and across from it stood a man, older, trembling, holding the journal. He looked at me like he recognized me. Then he whispered, "Not again," and vanished. When I woke up back in the trailer, my hands smelled like dust and cedar. I tried writing again, but the words didn't come from me. I'd stare at the page, and when I looked down, paragraphs had appeared, written in my handwriting, but with thoughts I didn't recognize. Thoughts about you, about the reader, the listener. Whoever is on the other end of this message, she's reaching for you now. I think that's what this was always about. A transmission. A virus disguised as a story. One that needs hosts not just to believe, but to remember. Because once you remember her, she never truly leaves. She takes root, grows quietly, slowly, until your memories are soil, your thoughts are fruit, and your name is just a husk she sheds before wearing you completely. I've tried ending it. Fire doesn't work. Silence doesn't work. Even forgetting doesn't last. She waits it out. She outlives doubt. That's the trick. If you doubt this story, she wins. If you believe it, she wins faster. Either way, she's inside now, just behind your eyes, watching, practicing your voice. I broke every mirror but still see her watching me through puddles, polished metal, blank television screens. Once I tried to kill the reflection, smashed it with a rock until blood ran down the side of my head. And when I looked again, she was still there, smiling with a mouth I didn't have. I think my reflection is the only part of me still real, trapped behind glass, screaming, and I'm what's left, a hollow narrator, the puppet reading her lines. You've heard of tulpas, right? Thought, forms, beings born from belief. But what if she's older than that? What if she is the thought itself? What if she predates story, predates memory, something elemental? Something that entered the human world the first time someone whispered a name in fear. My last memory, if it's even real, is of a phone call. I don't remember making it, but the voice on the other end said, "It's your turn." Then silence. I checked my call history later. There was no record of it. But the phrase stayed with me. Your turn. That's why I'm recording this. That's why it's finding you. Because stories don't end. They just change narrators. Maybe you'll be stronger. Maybe you'll resist her. Or maybe you'll see her tomorrow in your hallway mirror, one step too far behind your reflection. Maybe your voice will crack while speaking and you'll wonder, was that you or her? You won't be sure, not at first. But then, when you close your eyes to sleep, you'll hear it. The humming, low, soft, familiar, like someone just outside your door waiting. And maybe then you'll understand what I've tried to say. Maybe you'll go looking for the house. Maybe you'll open your own version of the trunk. Or maybe you already did. And this is just your memory replaying itself in her voice, trying to remind you that you were once someone else, that you once had a name that was yours, and now it belongs to her. If you're still here, still listening, then I need you to understand something before this ends, or before it begins again, depending on where you are in her story. There's no conclusion, no final chapter, no page where it says, the end. Because she doesn't allow endings, only retellings, variations, iterations, each time slightly different, slightly deeper. More embedded in the listener's memory, more fused with your thoughts. And the moment you accept that, the moment you remember her, she becomes permanent. I've tried every possible escape. I've gone off-grid, changed my name, burned the journal, deleted every file, every photo, every mention, but she doesn't live in those things. She lives in recognition. The second your brain shapes her silhouette in your mind's eye, she has her way in. She doesn't need doors, or pages, or names. She just needs memory. And once you remember her, she starts carving herself into your history, as if she was always there. A woman who stood at the edge of your dreams. A knock you thought you imagined at 3 a.m. A lullaby you swore you heard once, as a child, just before your fever spiked. She's always been there, hasn't she? You've just forgotten until now. And you'll try to convince yourself this is just fiction, a scary story someone made up for clicks or attention. But later tonight, when you're brushing your teeth, and something behind you shifts slightly in the mirror, you'll pause, just for a second. And when you turn, there'll be nothing there, but your heart will race, your mouth will go dry, because your body knows what your mind tries to deny. That's how she gets stronger. Through doubt. Doubt lets her breathe, move, feed, And now she's in every crack of your world, in the pause between your thoughts, in the cold spot near your bedroom door, in the whisper of static when you change the channel and no signal comes through. And just like me, you'll start to wonder when your story shifted. Was it when you first heard the title, when you pressed play, when you heard my voice? Or was it before that? When you dreamed of a trunk you had never seen before? When you saw someone in the attic window of a house that shouldn't exist? Maybe this is just the way she moves now, no longer confined to walls or wood or bloodstained journals. She moves through voice, through transmission, through story. So here's what's going to happen next. Soon you'll start noticing strange things. Minor at first. You'll misplace a shirt you haven't worn in years. Your reflection will seem a half-second too slow. A name will feel unfamiliar in your contacts list. A humming will come from inside your headphones, even when nothing is playing. You'll brush it off, you'll carry on. But she'll be closer. And one night when you're lying awake, convinced you're alone, you'll hear a breath near your ear. But no one will be there. Then you'll hear a voice, soft, gentle, yours, saying something you don't remember thinking, something like, "Let me finish." And you'll understand. You're not the audience anymore. You're the narrator now, the storyteller, the keeper, the one who carries her into the minds of others. The next recording you leave, the next version of this story you tell, it won't sound like this one. It will sound like you. It will have your memories, your details, your reality. But at its core, it will still be her. She is the constant, the black thread running through every tale whispered in the dark, every house someone's warned you not to visit, every locked door that was locked for a reason, and every name that should have been forgotten. So when you close this file, remember, you're part of it now. You always were. The trunk is open, the journal is incomplete, the next chapter is waiting, and someone, somewhere, is already listening.